Pinterest just reported its much anticipated quarterly results. And as we're recording this video, the stock is down about 5 or 6% the first trading day after that report. There's some things that look okay. There's some things that look pretty good. There's still some things that investors have plenty of reason to not be happy with. I'm Jason Hall. This is The Smattering. I have the voice of the people here with me, Jeff Santoro. We're going to talk about what's going on with Pinterest and see if we can arrive at the answer to, is Pinterest a stock to buy, sell, or hold right now? But before we talk about it, I just want to thank the Motley Fool who sponsors these videos. If you're looking for even more great stock ideas, go to our special link. You see it right above our heads here, fool.com/the smattering. The Fool's going to give you their 10 best stocks to buy right now. Hey, Jeff, you've had a chance to look through Pinterest results. You've been following the company, I think, since it went public just about. What do you think?
I'm a little bit conflicted with this quarter. Incremental improvements, I would say. Revenue growth ticked up a little bit. The net loss was smaller in this quarter than it was the previous year's quarter, but still it's not quite showing me that they're, I would say, back on track or trying to do the things they're trying to do. The big push with the new CEO and the new direction of the company is focusing less on user growth and more on monetizing the users by getting them to shop on the platform. So the goal is to, if you go onto Pinterest to get inspiration to organize your garage and you see a cool bike rack, they want you to buy that cool bike rack through Pinterest. We're not really seeing any evidence that that's paying off in any meaningful way. There were some mentions of it in the investor presentation, but it hasn't really trickled down through the numbers yet. But I think we want to talk through the big metrics that you follow when you follow Pinterest, which are monthly average users and average revenue per user. So if we look at those results, there was some bright spots here. There were things that you could be happy about. So as you can see, monthly average users globally were up 8%, US and Canada up 3%, Europe 6%, rest of the world 10%. Just remember that the rest of the world portion that was up so much comparatively is the smallest portion, right? So that's monthly active users. On the average revenue per user side, globally down 1%, US and Canada up 2%, Europe up 6%, and again, rest of world up 20%. This is important context because the fact that the smallest portion of their user base or average revenue per user base is growing the fastest gives some context for the overall numbers. But these are the things you want to look for Pinterest. Now, what I'm not seeing in my mind is enough ARPU growth to tell me that this shopping on the platform experience is really working out in a meaningful way yet. But they did give some metrics that said it was at least starting from a base of 0, showing some promise. So those are the top line things that I noticed looking at the results.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the monthly active users slide and then the ARPU and average revenue per user to really highlight what you're talking about, just to kind of beat it into people's heads to make it clear. If you look at the average revenue per user, the US and Canada by far generates the most revenue per, which makes sense, right? This is the core business. This is where there's a tremendous amount of economic activity. So that should be like their best ad business should be here, right? And so we see that's the case. But, and then of course, rest of world, a lot of this is developing economies, right? The amount of money people spend is not as much. So that's part of it. But why the average revenue per user fell, and that seems like a bad thing. And I don't necessarily think that it's right to consider it a bad thing. It's just, a thing, is because their fastest growing cohort and their largest cohort by far, again, 246 million users in their rest of world segment, which is basically everything except for the US, Canada, and Europe. It's by far growing at the fastest rate, and it is by far the smallest in terms of average revenue per user, and that's why this number fell. But Jeff, this is the thing that you were talking about I really want to highlight the most, which is this transition they're going through of trying to move away from just an ad-based business to getting a portion of that revenue where they click on the buy button on the bike rack or whatever, and Pinterest gets a cut of it. Looking quarter over quarter, last year's second quarter to this year's second quarter, that number only grew by 10 cents, right? And until we see this number really start to grow at a much higher rate, you're exactly right. We just don't have the evidence that this strategy is working. The only thing that we do have, and I'm going to read it from the company's presentation, they did say that shoppable content, so click-through rates on their shoppable pins and saves of those shoppable pins increased 50% year over year in the second quarter. And there was also an acceleration from the first quarter. So they're saying, look, there's we have metrics showing that it's better, but what we as investors don't have is hard data showing how much it's worth. What is it actually generating? Because they're not telling us if there's a decline in ad revenue that's also partially being offset by this click to buy revenue. We don't know those numbers. And until we see a meaningful acceleration in that ARPU, Jeff, I think you're right. Like we see some signs, but we just don't know how much it's worth at this point.
Yeah, and it's still early days of this shoppable thing. This is only something they've been trying to do for the last couple quarters. And year-over-year growth of monthly active users is starting to tick back up after a couple quarters of having it be down year over year. And some of that's just normalizing out of the pandemic. But if they can start reactivating old users or just growing their users, and they start discovering these shoppable pins and things like that, there is time for this still to play out. It's just a matter of how long and how patient investors want to be before we can start seeing some of those results.